Before I get started, please, kindly hit the subscription button, comment and like as this motivates more stories from this channel. The fluorescent lights of Seoul's Incheon Airport buzzed overhead as I gripped my passport so hard my knuckles ached. 23 years old, fresh out of Howard University with a degree in international business, and I had just made the most impulsive decision of my entire life. My mother's voice still echoed in my head from our phone call that morning. Amara, you are throwing away everything we worked for. Everything. But I was already here, already stepping off the plane. Already breathing Korean air for the first time, and feeling my heart pound with a mixture of terror and exhilaration I had never experienced before. What she didn't understand, what nobody understood, was that I wasn't running towards something. I was running away from the life that had been perfectly planned since I was 6 years old, away from the corner office at my father's accounting firm that was waiting for me like an open grave, away from Marcus, the perfect man my parents had been pushing me towards since junior year of college. I had applied to teach English in Seoul on a whim, drunk on cheap wine and heartbreak after finding Marcus in bed with my roommate 3 weeks before graduation. I never expected to get accepted. I never expected to actually go. But here I was. The arrivals hall swallowed me whole, a sea of Korean faces and rapid-fire syllables I couldn't understand. I felt like a child again, small and overwhelmed, my protective shell of confidence cracking with every passing second. I was supposed to meet someone from the teaching agency here, someone holding a sign with my name, but I saw nothing. No one. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. I called the agency number. Disconnected, I emailed. No response. The weight of what I had done, the magnitude of my recklessness, began pressing down on my chest like a physical force. I was alone, in a country where I didn't speak the language, with nobody coming to get me. I found a corner near the currency exchange and sat down on my suitcase, pulling my braids over my shoulder and trying not to cry. The tears came anyway, silent and hot, rolling down my cheeks as businessmen in sharp suits flowed past me without a second glance. That's when I heard it, a voice cutting through the chaos like a knife through silk. "Excuse me, are you okay?" I looked up and felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. He was tall, probably 6 feet, with the kind of face that made you forget what you were going to say. Sharp jaw, full lips, dark eyes that seemed to hold some private joke. His black hair was slightly disheveled, like he had been running, and he was wearing a leather jacket over a plain white t-shirt. He looked like he had walked straight out of one of those Korean dramas my college roommate used to watch obsessively. And he was looking at me, really looking at me, not with the curious stare I had gotten from everyone else since landing, but with genuine concern. "I'm fine," I said automatically, wiping my face with the back of my hand. "I'm totally fine." He raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth twitched. "You are crying alone in an airport. I don't think fine is the right word." His English was nearly perfect, with just the slightest accent that somehow made it more attractive. I felt my defenses going up immediately. I didn't need some random handsome stranger seeing me at my lowest moment. "Maybe I just like crying in airports," I shot back. "It's a hobby." He stared at me for a moment, then laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised and warm, and something in my chest loosened just a little. "I'm Jun-seo," he said, extending his hand, "but everyone calls me Juno." I hesitated. My mother's voice again: "Never trust strangers, especially not beautiful ones, they always want something." But my mother wasn't here, and I was alone, and sometimes when you're drowning you grab whatever hand reaches toward you. "Amara," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was warm and firm. "Amara Johnson." "Amara," he repeated, and the way my name sounded in his accent made my stomach flip. "That's beautiful. Does it mean something?" "Grace," I said. "It means grace." He smiled. "Grace crying in an airport, there's probably a metaphor there." Despite everything, I laughed, and in that moment something shifted between us, some invisible wall crumbling before it had fully formed. "So Grace," he said, settling onto the ground beside my suitcase like we were old friends, "tell me why you're crying alone at Incheon Airport. I have time." I don't know why I told him everything. Maybe because he was a stranger. Maybe because I was exhausted and scared and desperately needed someone to talk to. Maybe because his eyes held none of the judgment I had grown so used to seeing. I told him about Marcus, about the betrayal, about the impulsive application and the teaching job and the agency that seemed to have vanished into thin air. I told him I had exactly $800 to my name, a return ticket I couldn't use for 6 months, and absolutely no plan. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, then he pulled out his phone. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Calling my sister. She runs a hagwon in Gangnam, that's like a private academy. She's been looking for a new English teacher for weeks." He paused, phone pressed to his ear. "If you want, I mean, I'm not trying to be." "Yes," I said before I could talk myself out of it. "Yes, please." 20 minutes later, I was in the passenger seat of his silver Hyundai, watching Seoul's skyline emerge through the rain-streaked windows like a fever dream. Neon lights reflected on wet pavement. Skyscrapers kissed low-hanging clouds. Everything felt surreal, like I had stepped into someone else's life. "Why are you helping me?" I asked suddenly. "You don't know me." Juno's hands tightened on the steering wheel. For a moment I thought he wasn't going to answer. 3 years ago I was alone in Chicago, my first week in America for graduate school. I got robbed on the L train, lost everything, my wallet, my phone, my documents. I didn't know anyone. I couldn't speak English well enough to explain what happened. He glanced at me briefly. "A woman, a stranger, found me sitting on the platform. She was black like you. She took me to her apartment, fed me, helped me contact my family. She didn't have to do any of that, but she did." He turned back to the road. "I always promised myself I would pay it forward if I got the chance." I felt something warm bloom in my chest, something dangerous. "What happened to her, the woman who helped you?" "I don't know, I tried to find her after, but," he shook his head. "Chicago is a big city." The rain intensified, drumming against the roof like impatient fingers. Neither of us spoke for several miles. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the beginning of something, a story writing itself in real time. I just didn't know yet how complicated that story would become. Juno's sister Minjai was nothing like him. Where he was warm and easygoing, she was sharp-edged and efficient, with a no-nonsense bob and calculating eyes that sized me up the moment I walked through the door of her hagwon. "You have teaching experience?" she asked in clipped English. "I tutored in college," I said, straightening my spine, "and I have a degree in international business with a minor in—" "Good enough," she cut me off, sliding a contract across her desk. "You start Monday. There's a small apartment above the academy you can use until you find something better. The rent comes out of your salary." I blinked. That's it." "Were you expecting a singing competition?" She arched an eyebrow in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of my mother. "My brother says you need a job, I need a teacher. It's simple." It wasn't simple. Nothing about the next few weeks was simple. Teaching was harder than I expected. My students, ranging from elementary schoolers to high schoolers, were smart, demanding, and completely unimpressed by my American credentials. I stayed up until 2 in the morning every night preparing lesson plans, only to watch them fall apart within the first 10 minutes of class. I lost my voice. I lost my confidence. I cried in the tiny bathroom during my lunch breaks, convinced I had made the worst decision of my life. But every evening, like clockwork, Juno appeared. He would show up at the hagwon around 9, after my last class ended, and we would walk to a nearby Pojangmatcha, one of those little tent restaurants that lined the streets of Seoul like colourful secrets. We would sit on plastic stools and share bottles of soju and plates of tea tteokbokki, and he would listen to me vent about my terrible day with endless patience. "Your student called you a dumb American." He laughed so hard he nearly choked on his fish cake. "That's actually impressive. Usually they wait at least a month before the insults start." "This is not funny," I protested, but I was smiling despite myself. "I'm pretty sure they're plotting to overthrow me." "Definitely, Korean children are ruthless." He topped off my soju glass. "But you're still here, that's what matters." I wanted to ask why he kept coming back, why he spent his evenings with a struggling English teacher when he could be doing literally anything else. He had mentioned casually that he worked in finance, something to do with his family's company, which meant he probably had a million more important things to do than babysit a lost American girl. But I didn't ask, because I was afraid of the answer, and even more afraid of what I might hope the answer would be. It was 3 weeks before I finally met the rest of his family, and 3 weeks before I understood why this, whatever this was, could never work. "My mother is having her birthday dinner tomorrow night," Juno said one evening, his tone carefully casual. "I thought maybe you could come if you want." I nearly dropped my soju glass. Your mother's birthday, that seems like a family thing. It is, but you've been in Seoul for almost a month now, and you haven't experienced a real Korean family dinner yet. He smiled that lopsided smile that had become dangerously familiar. Consider it a cultural experience. I should have said no. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to decline, but when I opened my mouth what came out was, what time should I be ready? The Park family home was in Hanam-dong, a neighborhood I had learned was one of the wealthiest in all of Seoul. The house itself wasn't a house at all, but a sprawling architectural masterpiece, all glass and clean lines, perched on a hillside with a view of the city that made my breath catch. A maid in a crisp uniform opened the door and led me through a marble foyer into a living room that looked like something from a design magazine. Modern Korean art hung on pristine white walls. A baby grand piano sat in one corner, gleaming under soft lighting. Everything was expensive and tasteful and absolutely terrifying. Amara, Juno, appeared from somewhere deeper in the house, and I felt myself relax slightly at the sight of him. He was wearing a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, and I suddenly felt painfully underdressed in my simple black wrap dress. You came. You invited me, I said dryly. It would have been rude to say no. He laughed, taking my hand to lead me toward the dining room. His palm was warm against mine, and I tried not to think about how natural it felt. Just a warning, he murmured as we walked. My mother can be intense, don't let her intimidate you. I grew up with a Nigerian mother, I whispered back. I think I can handle intense. I was wrong. Mrs. Park was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she radiated an authority that filled the entire room. Her silver hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and diamonds glittered at her ears and throat. When her gaze landed on me, I felt like a specimen under a microscope. So, she said in English that was somehow both perfect and condescending, you are the American girl my son keeps disappearing to see. The room went silent. Jun-seo's father, a stern-faced man who looked like an older version of his son, set down his chopsticks. Min-jae suddenly became very interested in her phone, and Juno's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on mine. Mother, he said, his voice carefully controlled, this is Amara Johnson. She teaches at Min-jae's academy. Mrs. Park smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Yes, I know who she is. I know quite a lot about her, actually. Her failed relationship with a man named Marcus, her parents' disappointment in her choices, her impulsive decision to flee to Korea with no plan and no prospects. The blood drained from my face. How did she? I make it my business to know everything about the people my children associate with, Mrs. Park continued, as if reading my thoughts, especially when those people seem to be developing inappropriate attachments to my son. Mother, Juno's voice had gone cold in a way I had never heard before. That's enough. Is it, because from what I understand, you've been spending every evening with this girl instead of fulfilling your obligations to this family, instead of attending to the business, instead of, she paused delicately, instead of Soo-yeon. The name hung in the air like a dropped bomb. I turned to Juno. Who is Soo-yeon? He wouldn't meet my eyes. His jaw was tight, his whole body rigid, and in that moment I understood something terrible. Soo-yeon is his fiancée, Mrs. Park said, her smile widening. Didn't he tell you? The walls of the beautiful house seemed to close in around me. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Drowning out whatever Juno was saying, some protest, some explanation, I didn't care. Fiancé, the word repeated itself in my mind like a death knell. I pulled my hand free of his grip. I should go. Amara, wait, please let me explain. But I was already moving, already grabbing my purse from the chair where I had set it, already walking toward the door with the kind of forced dignity that was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. I made it to the street before the tears came. I made it 3 blocks before I had to stop, leaning against a cold stone wall and sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. Not again, not again. I had sworn after Marcus that I would never let myself be made a fool again. I had sworn I would protect myself. I had built walls so high I thought no one could ever climb them, and somehow, without my permission, Juno had slipped through every crack. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. The worst part was that some small, shameful part of me still wanted him to come after me, still wanted him to have some explanation that made everything okay, still wanted the fairy tale I had been too smart to believe in since I was 12 years old, and watched my own father walk out on my mother for another woman. He did come after me, of course he did. I heard his footsteps before I saw him, running, slightly out of breath. Amara, please just listen. There's nothing to listen to. I kept walking, my heels clicking against the pavement like a countdown. You have a fiancé, that's all I need to know. It's not what you think. It never is. He grabbed my arm, gently but firmly, forcing me to stop. It was an arrangement. Our families made it when we were children. I've tried to break it off a dozen times, but my mother, my family's business connections, it's complicated. I laughed bitterly. Complicated, right. I was going to tell you, he ran a hand through his hair, frustration written across every line of his face. I didn't know how, and then every day it got harder because you were here and you were real and you were the first person in my entire life who made me feel like I could actually be myself. Something in his voice made me pause, made me really look at him for the first time since we left the house. He looked wrecked, his carefully styled hair was disheveled, his tie was loose, his jacket missing entirely, and his eyes, those beautiful dark eyes, were red-rimmed and desperate. I'm not asking you to understand, he said quietly. I'm not even asking you to forgive me. I just need you to know that whatever you think this was for me, it was more. It was everything. I stood there on that cold Seoul street, caught between my own heartbreak and the raw pain in his voice, between my sworn promise to never be a fool again and the terrifying realization that I had already fallen for him, completely and irreversibly. I can't do this, I whispered. I can't be the other woman, I can't be someone's secret. You were never a secret, everyone in my life knows about you. That's why my mother, he broke off, shaking his head. She's scared, she knows how I feel about you and she's scared because you're not part of her plan. How do you feel about me? The question escaped before I could stop it, before I could remind myself that it didn't matter, that I was leaving, that whatever he said would only make this harder. Juno stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, cedar and something warm I couldn't name, close enough that I could see the slight tremble in his hands. I feel like I've been living my whole life underwater, he said softly, and you're the first breath of air I've ever taken. The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable. His lips were soft against mine, tentative at first and then deeper, more urgent. His hands cupped my face like I was something precious, something worth protecting, and for one perfect, terrible moment, I let myself fall completely. Then I remembered. No, I pulled back, pressing my fingers to my lips like I could erase the sensation. No, we can't do this, not like this. The hurt in his eyes nearly broke me. Amara. Fix it, I said, my voice shaking but firm. If you want me, if this is real, then fix it. End things with Soo-yeon. Stand up to your mother. Show me that I'm not just another secret to be hidden. And if I can't? The question hung between us like a blade. Then we never see each other again. I walked away. Every step felt like tearing off a piece of my own heart and leaving it behind on the pavement. But I kept walking, because I had spent my whole life watching women sacrifice their dignity for men who couldn't do the bare minimum. My mother, my aunts, half the women I knew. I refused to be another cautionary tale. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I threw myself into teaching with a fervor that bordered on obsession. I rewrote my lesson plans. I learned Korean phrases to connect better with my students. I stayed at the Hagwon until midnight, then collapsed into dreamless exhaustion in my tiny apartment. Minjae noticed, of course. She was too sharp not to. My brother is an idiot, she said bluntly one afternoon, cornering me in the break room. But he's also my idiot, so I feel obligated to tell you that he's completely fallen apart since you stopped speaking to him. That's not my problem. It is, actually, because when Jun-seo is miserable, he makes terrible business decisions, which affects my family's company, which affects my salary, which affects my ability to pay you. She arched an eyebrow. So you see, it's all very connected. I almost smiled. I told him what he needs to do. Yes, he's trying. She paused, something almost like respect flickering in her eyes. I thought you should know that he's trying. That night I allowed myself to wonder, to hope just a little. 3 days later, the news broke. I was eating lunch in the break room when one of the other teachers, a chatty young woman named Hyejin, practically ran in with her phone extended like a weapon. You know Park Jun-seo, right? She demanded breathlessly. The chaebol heir, the one your student said she saw you kissing outside her apartment building. I choked on my kimbap. What? Hyejin thrust her phone in my face. The headline on the gossip site was in Korean, but I had learned enough to make out the key words. Park Jun-seo Breaks engagement. Family in chaos. My heart stopped. I snatched the phone, frantically using the translator app I had downloaded. The article was sensational and breathless, but the basic facts were clear. Jun-seo had publicly ended his engagement to Han Soo-yeon at a major business event the previous night. In front of hundreds of guests. In front of both families. He had apparently made a speech about following his heart, about refusing to live a lie, about not being able to marry someone he didn't love. The internet was losing its mind. Comments ranged from supportive to vicious, speculating about everything from secret affairs to mental breakdowns. But one comment stood out, translated roughly as, "He kept talking about Grace. What does that mean?" Grace. My name. The phone nearly slipped from my trembling fingers. He did it, he actually did it. I left work early, ignoring Minjai's knowing smirk as I grabbed my coat and practically ran out the door. I didn't know where to find him. I didn't have his address. All I had was his phone number, unused for 2 weeks, and a desperate hope that he would answer. He picked up on the first ring. Amara, his voice was rough, exhausted, but somehow warm. I was going to come find you tonight. I wanted to give you space, but... Where are you? A pause, the Han River near Bampo Bridge. I needed to think and... Stay there, I'm coming. I had never moved so fast in my life. I flagged down a taxi, gave the driver the address in my broken Korean, and watched the city blur past through rain-streaked windows. The same rain, the same city, but everything was different now. He was standing at the water's edge when I found him, his back to me, his hands shoved in his pockets. The famous rainbow fountain of Bampo Bridge created arcs of coloured water behind him, but he wasn't watching. He was staring at the dark water like it held answers he couldn't find anywhere else. Jun-seo. He turned, and the look on his face, hope and fear and desperate love all tangled together, made my eyes burn with tears I refused to shed. Is it true? I asked, stopping a few feet away. Everything the articles said. The articles are trash. He laughed humorlessly. They got about half of it right, but the important part, yes, Soo-yeon and I are done, officially, publicly, permanently. My mother is furious. My father has apparently disowned me temporarily, although he does that every few months so it might not stick. And the company stock dropped 2% overnight because apparently my personal life is somehow everyone's business. I'm sorry, I didn't mean for... Don't, he stepped closer. Don't apologize. You told me what you needed and you were right. I was a coward. I let my family's expectations run my life for 30 years because it was easier than fighting. But then I met you and suddenly easy wasn't enough anymore. Jun-seo. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm not asking you to make the mess I've created somehow worth it. He swallowed hard. I needed you to know that I chose. For the first time in my life I chose for myself, and I chose you. I closed the distance between us, pressed my palm against his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath his expensive shirt. You're an idiot, I whispered. I know. Your mother is going to make my life a living hell. Probably. And your family's business problems are not my responsibility. Absolutely not. And I'm not going to be your secret, or your rebellion, or your exotic adventure. I'm going to be difficult and demanding, and I'm going to call you out on your privilege, and I'm not going to apologize for any of it. He smiled, that beautiful, lopsided smile that had undone me from the very first moment. I'm counting on it. I kissed him. It was different from our first kiss. No desperation, no forbidden urgency. This was a promise, a beginning. His arms came around me, holding me close against the cold wind off the river, and I let myself melt into him completely. When we finally pulled apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead against mine. So what happens now? I laughed. I have no idea. I've never done any of this before. The interracial thing, the chaebol thing, the being disowned by your family thing. Neither have I. We can figure it out together. Together, the word wrapped around me like a blanket. Together, I agreed. The next few months were exactly as difficult as I had expected. Mrs. Park refused to speak to me, or to acknowledge my existence in any way. When I accompanied Jun-seo to family events, at his insistence and over my repeated protests, she would look straight through me like I was invisible. The rest of the extended family followed her lead, creating an impenetrable wall of icy politeness that was somehow worse than open hostility would have been. Mr. Park was marginally better. He at least nodded at me occasionally, and once after Jun-seo successfully negotiated a major deal that saved the company significant money, he actually said thank you to me, apparently because Min-jae had told him I had coached Jun-seo through his negotiation anxiety the night before. The Korean public was less subtle. My face ended up in gossip magazines and on internet forums, dissected and discussed by strangers who had opinions about my hair, my skin, my body, my background. Some were supportive, many were not. I learned new Korean words from the comments, words I wished I didn't know. But there were good moments too, so many good moments. There was the morning I woke up to find that Jun-seo had covered my tiny apartment in flowers, every surface overflowing with roses and lilies and orchids, because I had mentioned once offhandedly that my father used to bring my mother flowers before everything fell apart. "I want to be the one who never stops bringing you flowers," he said simply, and I cried into his shoulder for 20 minutes. There was the afternoon he showed up at the Hagwon with all of my students' favorite snacks, introducing himself as Teacher Amara's special friend, and then proceeding to win over every single one of them with his ridiculous jokes and his willingness to make a complete fool of himself during the games. There was the night we stayed up until 4 a.m. on his apartment balcony, sharing our worst fears and deepest shames, his terror of failing his family's legacy, my conviction that I would somehow become my mother, both of our certainties that we weren't good enough, could never be good enough, would inevitably destroy this beautiful thing we had found. "What if we're not compatible long-term?" I asked, watching the Seoul skyline glitter like scattered diamonds. "What if the cultural differences are too much? What if your family never accepts me? What if mine never accepts you?" Jun-seo was quiet for a long moment, then he took my hand, interlacing our fingers. "My grandmother used to tell me a story," he said softly, "about a gardener who found a strange flower growing in his garden, a flower he had never seen before that didn't belong to any species he recognized. His neighbors told him to pull it out. His family said it would ruin his garden. Everyone insisted it didn't belong. What did he do? He kept it, he watered it, he protected it from the frost and the sun and all the things that tried to destroy it, and eventually, it bloomed more beautiful than anything anyone had ever seen." He turned to look at me, his eyes soft in the dim light. "My grandmother said that's what love is, taking care of something that doesn't fit, that doesn't make sense, that everyone says is wrong, taking care of it anyway until it becomes exactly what it was always meant to be." I didn't have words for what I felt in that moment, so I kissed him instead, pouring everything, my fear, my hope, my terrifying, overwhelming love, into the press of my lips against his. 6 months after I arrived in Seoul, my mother came to visit. I had been dreading this moment since I booked her ticket. Our relationship had always been complicated, a tangle of love and disappointment, and unspoken wounds that neither of us knew how to heal. She had barely spoken to me since I left for Korea, responding to my weekly calls with tight-lipped disapproval and obvious sighs. Jun-seo insisted on coming to the airport with me. "She's going to hate me," he said cheerfully. "Might as well get it over with." "She won't hate you. I'm the reason her daughter is living in a foreign country instead of working for her father's company. She definitely hates me." I couldn't argue with his logic. My mother emerged from the arrival's gate looking exactly as I remembered, impeccably dressed, not a hair out of place, her expression revealing nothing of the 15-hour flight she had just endured. Her eyes swept over me, cataloguing changes, the weight I had lost, the new confidence in my posture, the Korean fashion I had unconsciously adopted. Then her gaze landed on Jun-seo. I had prepared myself for hostility, for cutting remarks and barely veiled insults, for the full force of Nigerian maternal disapproval directed at the man who had, in her eyes, stolen her daughter. What I wasn't prepared for was tears. My mother, Adiz Johnson, who hadn't cried in public since my father left, burst into tears right there in Incheon Airport. "Mama," I rushed forward alarmed. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" She grabbed me, pulling me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "I was so worried," she sobbed. I was so worried and so angry, and I didn't know how to say I was sorry for all the terrible things I said when you left. And then you stopped calling as much, and I thought you hated me and… Mama, I was crying too now, clutching her like I was 5 years old again. I could never hate you. I just needed you to let me make my own mistakes. I know, she pulled back, cupping my face in her hands. Look at you, you look happy, really happy, something I haven't seen since you were a little girl. I laughed through my tears. I am happy, happier than I've ever been. Her eyes drifted to Jun-seo, who was standing a respectful distance away, looking like he wanted to bolt for the exit. And this is the man responsible for my daughter's happiness. I held my breath. My mother walked over to Jun-seo, looked him up and down with the critical eye that had terrorized everyone from business associates to restaurant servers for as long as I could remember. Jun-seo, to his credit, didn't flinch, though I could see the slight tension in his shoulders. Park Jun-seo, my mother said, I understand you gave up quite a lot for my daughter. Mrs. Johnson, his voice was steady, I gained more than I gave up. A beat of silence, then incredibly my mother smiled. Good answer, she said. Now, I assume you're taking us somewhere nice for dinner. I haven't eaten since Tokyo and I'm starving. The dinner that night was surreal in the best possible way. My mother and Jun-seo discovered a shared love of old American jazz. She had grown up listening to her father's record collection, and he had developed an obsession during his years in Chicago. By the second bottle of wine, they were debating the relative merits of Miles Davis versus John Coltrane, while I sat back and watched in amazement. Later, after Jun-seo had kissed me goodbye and headed home, my mother and I walked along the Cheonggyecheon stream, the city lights reflected in the gentle water. He's nothing like your father, she said suddenly. I startled. We never talked about my father, not directly. I know, I said carefully. Your father was charming, he made everyone love him, but underneath all that charm he was a coward. He ran from everything: responsibility, commitment, truth. She stopped walking, turning to face me. This man, Jun-seo, he ran toward. He gave up his whole life for you. That's not cowardice, that's courage. His mother still hates me, I admitted. I'm not sure she'll ever accept me. Maybe not, but that's her loss. My mother took my hands in hers. Amara, I spent so many years trying to protect you from being hurt the way I was hurt. I pushed you toward stability, toward safety, toward men like Marcus who would never challenge you enough to break you. But that's not living, that's just surviving. Mama, you are living now. I can see it in your eyes, in your smile, in the way you talk about your students and your life here. You're not running anymore, neither is he. She squeezed my hands. That's all I ever really wanted for you. I hugged her again, right there on the stream path, tourists flowing around us like water around stones. And for the first time in years, I felt like I might actually understand my mother. 1 year to the day after I arrived in Seoul, Jun-seo took me back to Incheon Airport. This is where it all started, he said, leading me to the exact corner where I had sat crying on my suitcase. Right here, you were a complete mess. Excuse me. Red eyes, runny nose, looking like the world had ended. He grinned. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. You're insufferable. And yet here you are. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, a very distinctive small box, still putting up with me. My heart stopped. Jun-seo, what is that? He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not the enormous diamond I might have expected from a chaebol heir, but a simple gold band with a small emerald set in the center. My birthstone, my favorite color, something he had remembered from a conversation we'd had months ago. I know this isn't traditional, he said, his voice slightly unsteady. I know we haven't known each other that long by some standards. I know my family is a mess and your family is 4,000 miles away and nothing about us makes sense on paper. Jun-seo. But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life making you laugh, making you frustrated, making you feel seen in a way nobody else ever will. He knelt, right there in the airport where we had met, and I was vaguely aware of people stopping to stare, phones coming out, whispers spreading. Amara Johnson, Grace, will you marry me? I looked at this man, this ridiculous, brave, infuriating, wonderful man who had dismantled his entire life for the possibility of loving me, who had stood up to his family, his culture, his expectations, all because a crying girl in an airport made him feel something real. Yes, I said, obviously yes. He slid the ring onto my finger, then stood and kissed me while strangers applauded and cameras flashed, and the fluorescent lights of Incheon Airport buzzed overhead like a benediction. Later, I would learn that the video of his proposal had gone viral. The handsome chaebol heir and his American girlfriend, their love story captured in real time. Later, I would have to deal with the media attention, the public scrutiny, the endless comments from people who had opinions about our relationship. But in that moment, none of it mattered. There was only Jun-seo's arms around me, his heart beating against mine, and the certain knowledge that I had found something worth every risk I had taken. Our wedding took place on a spring day, 18 months after we met. We held it at a traditional Hanok village outside Seoul, a compromise between Korean tradition and my desire for something intimate and meaningful. My mother flew in with my aunts and cousins, who immediately adopted Jun-seo as one of their own. His father attended, looking uncomfortable but present. Min-jae was my maid of honor, which would have seemed impossible a year earlier but now felt perfectly natural. Mrs. Park did not come. I had made my peace with that. Some wounds don't heal on the timeline we want. Some bridges can't be rebuilt in a year or 2 years or maybe ever. Jun-seo had offered to postpone the wedding until his mother came around, but I refused. We're not putting our life on hold for someone who doesn't want to be part of it, I told him. If she changes her mind, she'll be welcome, but we're not waiting. He didn't argue. The ceremony was bilingual, Korean and English, with a Nigerian libation ceremony at my mother's insistence and a traditional Korean tea ceremony that made Jun-seo's father cry, something I would tease him about for years to come. I wore a traditional hanbok for the first half and a white dress for the second, and Jun-seo looked at me through both like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. During the reception, Min-jae pulled me aside. I have something for you, she said, pressing an envelope into my hands. Don't open it yet, wait until you're alone. What is it? She hesitated. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked almost vulnerable. It's from my mother. I felt the blood drain from my face. Just read it, please. Later that night, after the guests had gone and Jun-seo was dealing with some last-minute crisis involving the catering, I opened the envelope in our hotel room. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in elegant Korean script, and beneath it a translation in Min-jae's handwriting. Amara, I have not been kind to you, I have not been fair. I looked at you and saw only what you represented, the end of my plans, the disruption of everything I had built for my son's future. But tonight I watched the video of your wedding ceremony. Min-jae sent it without asking permission, as she often does things without asking permission. I watched my son's face as he looked at you. I watched the way he smiled, really smiled in a way I haven't seen since he was a small boy, before I taught him to hide his feelings behind duty and expectation. I made my son into a good businessman. I made him responsible, disciplined, everything a Park heir should be. But I also made him lonely. I made him afraid to want anything for himself. I made him believe that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. You undid all of that. You gave him permission to be human. I'm not ready to say I was wrong. I may never be ready to say that out loud, but I'm writing it now and I hope that counts for something. Welcome to the family, Amara. The tears were running down my face before I finished reading. I was still crying when Jun-seo came in, and I handed him the letter without explanation. He read it twice, then he sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. She never, his voice cracked. In my entire life she's never admitted she was wrong about anything. I sat beside him, resting my head on his shoulder. Maybe people can surprise us. Maybe, he turned to look at me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. You certainly surprised me. I kissed him softly. You surprised me too. 3 years later, I stood on the balcony of our apartment in Gangnam, watching the sun set over Seoul. Behind me, Jun-seo was on the phone with his mother, their now weekly calls that had become a strange new normal since our wedding. In the nursery down the hall, our daughter was sleeping, her tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. We named her Grace. Min-jae said it was too obvious. Jun-seo said it was perfect. I didn't care what anyone said, she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Sometimes I think about that girl in the airport, the one with the red eyes and the runny nose and the broken heart, sitting on her suitcase and crying because her life had fallen apart. I want to go back in time and tell her that falling apart was the best thing that ever happened to her, that sometimes you have to lose everything before you can find where you actually belong. But she wouldn't have believed me. She was too scared, too hurt, too convinced that the world was set up to disappoint her. She had to learn it for herself. Jun-seo comes up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. What are you thinking about? How I almost didn't get on that plane. He presses a kiss to my neck. Worst decision you never made. I laugh, leaning back into his warmth. The best decision was trusting some random guy at the airport who couldn't mind his own business. Excuse me, I was being gallant. You were being nosy. Gallantly nosy. I turn in his arms, looping my hands behind his neck. Thank you. For what? For seeing me, for not looking away. I stretch up to kiss him, soft and slow, for running toward instead of away. He smiles against my lips, that beautiful lopsided smile that still makes my heart flip after all this time. Always. In the nursery, Grace stirs and lets out a small cry. We both turn toward the sound automatically, our bodies moving in the synchronized dance of new parenthood. Your turn, he says. It was my turn an hour ago. Fine, we'll go together. We walk to the nursery side by side, and I pick up our daughter while Jun-seo makes ridiculous faces to calm her down. She stops crying almost immediately, her dark eyes focusing on her father with something like recognition. She has your stubbornness, Jun-seo observes. She has your ears. My ears are dignified. Keep telling yourself that. He laughs, pulling us both into his arms, and for a moment we just stand there, the three of us, tangled together in the soft light of the nursery. I was everything he shouldn't want, an impulsive, stubborn, complicated woman who didn't fit into any of the boxes his life had prepared for him. He was everything I shouldn't want, a privileged chaebol heir with a family that would never fully accept me, and a culture I was still learning to understand. But wanting never followed the rules, and love, real love, didn't wait for permission. Sometimes the wrong choice leads you exactly where you need to be. Sometimes the person who makes no sense on paper makes perfect sense in your heart. Sometimes you have to trust the falling, even when you can't see where you'll land. I looked at my husband, my daughter, my life that I never planned and never expected, and I knew without question that I would choose this path again. 1,000 times over. Forever. Please kindly hit the subscription button, comment and like as this